Welcome to the Westminster Effects Doxology Podcast, where we exist for the glory of God and the tone of his people. I'm Cody Fields. Go buy stuff for your guitar, pedals specifically, at westminstereffects.com. Join the discussion in the Westminster Effects Green Room on Facebook, and like, subscribe, comment, etc. wherever you're watching this. I'm joined in person by...
Hey everybody, Bradley Cox, pastor at Resurrection Church in Greer, South Carolina.
We're not joined by Lutheran John Ross, but have you looked at the comments on the YouTube video of our last episode?
Not the comments.
We struck a nerve.
Did we really?
Yeah.
Oh dear.
The Ortho Bros came out in full force. If you want some quality entertainment, go look at that.
Oh dear.
Or if you
Made
want
some enemies, did we?
I guess so. It's funny, like some guys came in and were very thoughtful. Like, here's why I went Roman Catholic or Orthodox or whatever. Okay, fine. You had your reasons. And then some guys are like, well, maybe you should have talked to somebody who converted. And I'm like, maybe I should have, but also don't be a turd.
Sometimes I don't know what kind of mire you're getting me in on these things.
Don't worry about it. We'll just see what...
I'm just here.
Just here for the ride.
That's I told my kids I'm going to get a t-shirt that just says, I'm just here.
I'm just here. Speaking of people not being turds, professional segue.
I'm telling you, I don't know how many episodes we're in now, but you're getting good.
We're getting good. The Joe Rogan Wes Huff thing.
Yeah, man.
What a cultural phenomenon in the first place.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with how Wesley Huff ended up on Rogan?
I'm not.
So he had a basically spur of the moment discussion with a YouTuber named Billy Carson, who has also been on Rogan. And Billy Carson has no idea what he's talking about. He's basically an anti-Christian apologist. And so in their discussion, there's a clip of Carson saying the Sinai Bible says that Jesus didn't die for sin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, do you mean Codex Sinaiticus? Because I have a copy of it right here, and I can read Greek.
He's impressive.
And he just laid it out, right? And so that led to, obviously flattening a lot of things. That led to Wesley Huff being invited on Joe Rogan. So let me tee it up with this. I have 3 different clips. We can start and stop, pause, interact, however much we want. This one's just like 20 seconds or something like that.
One of the things that I've gotten out of I've probably watched 20 hours of your stuff over the last couple of weeks. And you've spent a lot of time on this. This is not a casual, cursory examination of these texts and of religion. This is a long journey. And that's what's particularly exceptional and really interesting to me, because I'm always fascinated by people that have really gone down the road, like really, really, really gone down the road, because you don't meet a whole lot of them. I know a lot of Christians that can quote you some versions of the New Testament, some Psalms, but the real, the go all the way to the back, way. And that's what you've done. That's very interesting.
How interesting is that?
Well, it is interesting. It's intriguing. Like there's part of me that I'm like, Rogan, I like him. I mean, I know that there's going to be some people that are like, turned off by his language and whatever, but I like Rogan. And I like, I like that ethic. He's interested in people that have done their homework. Yeah. And so there's a part of me that just wants to cheer him on in that. And then there's another part of me that goes, this is an indictment on the church.
Yes.
That it's so true. There's so many, card-carrying Christians out there who they can quote a verse here and there. They have a couple of sermon sound bites, but they don't know the scriptures.
Yep.
And there's really no excuse for that, because I know Huff is a scholar, but Rogan is not.
Yep.
But he's smart enough to recognize when people have actually gone all in with the faith that they proclaim, and the ones that haven't.
I've been an advocate for generalism for a long time, of knowing a little bit about a lot of things. it just clicked with me is Rogan is kind of a specialized generalist. He has a couple of things he really, really knows. He knows MMA.
Yeah.
Right. He knows martial arts. He knows comedy, and he knows how to do an interview. Dadgummit.
Man, he does.
Like his
podcast is amazing.
Yeah, he knows how to extract the best possible answers out of people by answering or asking questions in really thoughtful ways. But that also requires him to be a little bit of a generalist. He needs to know a little bit. So when he interviewed J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, John Fetterman, all three in a row, he had to know a little bit about the political process.
Yep.
When he interviews Wesley Huff, he has to know a little bit about textual criticism. Just a little bit, enough to get through the conversation. But that means that he necessarily has listened to a lot of different people. And he's intelligent, and he can see holes in arguments pretty easily.
And what does that also say about him? It has to say that he's not a guy who is fiddle farting around on social media for 90% of his free time.
Right.
He's intentional, and I have a lot of respect for that.
Yep. All right. Well, I have two more clips. We can stop and start however much we want. So if something pops up, and just tell me to stop it.
Okay.
I really like the way that Jordan Peterson articulates it, but I think he misses the forest for the trees.
How so?
In that he sees Jesus as an archetype. And I don't think actually even Jesus gives you the opportunity to see him as the archetype. Because I have this love-hate relationship with all of Peterson's stuff, because he seems to get so much right where he walks up to the line, but he doesn't want to cross over.
And is the crossover, you think, connected to a life in academia?
No.
What do you think it is?
I wonder, and I'd love to talk to him about this, like how do you remedy this issue that, because he seems to think that the concept of Jesus as an example is more important than the actual flesh and blood first century itinerant Jewish preacher who was crucified and rose from the dead physically, which is the claim of the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament. That's an example for us to look on and live by. But I actually think that Jesus condemns moralism. And ultimately what I see Peterson doing is looking at Jesus as a moral example. And if Jesus is nothing but a moral example, then you can save yourself and you don't actually need a savior. And so...
Let me pause it right there.
I was hoping you were going to show that clip.
Yeah. Rogan's response there.
I mean...
He understands what Huff is saying there.
Yeah.
There's already law gospel presented, right? Like there were some people who were critical of Huff for basically not articulating a gospel presentation the way that they would do it, like a chick tract,
right.
As opposed to, to me, the way Huff is going about it, and we'll see it as this clip finishes out, it's closer to the Book of Acts, where you think about Peter in Acts 2. At Pentecost, they have a sound like wind, and they start speaking in different languages, and people come around and what's going on here. And he just tells the story, and he ends with, this Jesus whom you crucified, God has made both Lord and Christ. And you like to say you can imagine him just turning around and starting to go back into the upper room. And they're like, no, hold on. I need more.
Tell us.
Yeah.
I think this is also a really good reflection of the way Jesus dealt with people. We're going to be in John chapter 3 this week, and Jesus's interaction with Nicodemus, who is a teacher of Israel, well-versed in the Old Testament. And Jesus's approach with him is different than the way he approaches other people.
Right.
He meets people where they are, and he gives them truth, and to the degree that I think they can at least take a step towards him.
Sure.
And I think that's what, it's not to say that Jesus is going to leave people in an unregenerate state with only some truth, but he does incrementally lead people. And I think Huff he's meeting Rogan where he is.
Right. And Rogan definitely being familiar with Jordan Peterson, he's had him on his podcast and whatnot. And so basically saying, all right, Peterson's a brilliant guy. He has some really good insights. However, he doesn't actually go all the way where he should.
Yeah. And I think I'll say this and we can resume.
Yeah.
I think the topic of, Jesus and Christianity as just moralism, or that Jesus was a moralist and a moral example, any thinking person realizes that moralism, no matter what religious package it's put in, is fraught with holes. It doesn't work. Human nature undercuts it every time. We've got to have something more than a moral example, and that's where Huff is going. And Rogan is like, "Yep, you're right."
Yep.
I think actually Jesus would have critiqued that because Jesus was very against moralism.
And how do you define Jesus being against moralism? Like, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, Jesus looks at the religiosity of his day with like particular groups like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who are these other groups of Jews during his day. So we talked about the Essenes, who actually aren't mentioned in the Bible, but there are other groups like the Pharisees, who are like lay scholars, and the Sadducees, who are professional priest scholars. And he's constantly critiquing the fact that they have this hypocritical religiosity to them, where they're doing things like tithing their mint leaves, like to make sure that they get all of. This is where we get the idea of the letter of the law versus the intention of the law. Like Jesus critiques them for that because he says, you're trying to do everything right and you're missing the point. So one of the things he says is like, if your donkey falls in a ravine on the Sabbath, do you pull it out? Or does that work? Like, what's the point of the Sabbath? Is it to not do any work? Like, is it to make sure that you're not working too hard because you might be breaking the Sabbath? Or like, what is the point? He says, like, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And that there's this intention. This is the whole Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, is he keeps saying, you have heard it said, but I say, and he refers to the Mosaic Law. And it looks like he's critiquing the Mosaic Law, but he's not actually. He's getting back to the intention of the law. So when he says, you have heard it said, do not commit murder, but I say to you, anybody who harbors a hate for their brother in their heart has already committed murder. And what he's getting to is like, what's the intention? What's the meaning of the law that God gives to you? Because the law is like a mirror. It shows you how dirty you are. But his critique is he's like, you guys are trying to clean yourself with a mirror. That's stupid. It's just if anything, it's going to make you more messy. Like, get in the shower. The law is not what cleans you. The law is what reveals that you're dirty. And so in that sense, I think, if Jesus is a moral example, it actually misses what I think Jesus actually said about what his purpose was, in that you can't do enough to actually live up to the standard that God holds you to. And so if you keep striving, you're actually going to wear yourself out and be exhausted.
Like atheists.
I didn't say you did, Joe.
Wow. It's such a great, like, I really appreciate people who are not only brilliant, but they're thoughtful and well-read, like Huff. To be able to explain that law-gospel relationship right there with the cookies on the lowest shelf. I don't know of any, certainly any adult that could not listen to that. I think my 15-year-old daughter would listen to that and she'd go, yep. Yep.
Yep. And he, let me see what's the best way to put this? There's, within Big Eva ranks, you always had, especially 10, 15 years ago, this push for winsomeness, right? And winsomeness is appropriate sometimes. and Huff here is, I think, appropriately winsome. He's not putting unnecessary obstacles between Rogan and the gospel, right? But he is blunt enough to effectively call what Jordan Peterson, like it's 2 minutes after, like he says, Peterson's wrong here. And then he actually calls what Peterson's doing stupid.
Yeah.
Right. Because moralism is stupid. You're trying to clean yourself with the mirror. And so he doesn't pull that punch.
Right.
But it's not Rogan who's being hostile to him. Like I have absolute room in my mind for dealing with idiots sarcastically. Right? You don't have to treat everyone with kid gloves all the time. Sometimes you need to just say, yeah, you are being stupid. His interaction with Rogan here is, no, that idea is stupid. And Rogan understands exactly what he's saying.
And I think Rogan understands, and I'm not exactly sure which clip you're going to show next. I think you made some reference to it. And so I might see where there's a thread here, but it seems like this conversation has touched on something that, yes, Rogan gets, not because he's smart enough to get it, but because he's human.
Right.
There is something in every human being that knows we have a moral problem.
Yep.
That moralism won't solve.
Yep.
Like I think every honest person would admit that. Now there might be some that push back on that with, weak arguments. But that to me is so beautiful. It's like Tulip, total depravity. Mm-hmm. We've almost touched on that without going all the way there, but it's almost like that conversation has gone there with that Jesus has to be more than a moralist, not only because of what he said, but because of what we also realize about our own nature.
Right. You also have, never mind. We'll just go on. So parents, if you're listening with your kids, I do censor this. you do catch the first letter of what he's saying. So yeah. Use your discretion if you're listening with your kids, but I do censor Rogan, and obviously we can start and stop as we go.
Changes the course of human history. This thing changes the direction, the ideology that these people subscribe to, and the moral and ethical structure that they live their life by. It changes untold billions of human beings from that point on. Yeah. Pretty fascinating. Yeah. That in itself, even if this is just a revelation without a divine interaction, that's a miracle. Yeah. It's a miracle that it was created at all. Like the whole idea that
he's not wrong.
No, I mean, I've said this before. I mean, the fact that Christianity made it out of the first century.
Yeah.
Like that is a miracle.
You have to reckon with that.
And it's not like it didn't make it out of the first century because of a superpower with an army. Mm-hmm. It was a bunch of rogue fishermen and former tax collectors, even the female, like a former prostitute, these are the people. And at the end of Jesus's ministry, he had thousands of people that listened to that Sermon on the Mount. Mm-hmm. And at the end, when he died, there was 120 in that upper room.
Right.
120?
Yep.
And literally, it's changed the course of human history in and of itself. That is, I'm not going to use his word, but it is a miracle.
It is a miracle.
Christianity, when you're saying that the book of, was it the book of Isaiah?
Yeah.
That the same book is exactly the same as, like, that's a miracle. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy.
If you just imagine the sheer number of illiterate people, the sheer number of days that have to go by where people are telling the story exactly the same, and that it's entrusted in the hands of these very few people that are so dedicated to it that they get the exact words right 1,000 years later, pretty bananas.
Well, I mean, that is kind of the crazy thing about Christianity, where
there were a couple of, I'll just say morons nicely online who were just so irritated that Wesley Huff would go on Joe Rogan because Joe Rogan uses bad language. What do you expect?
I mean, I hear that kind of talk, and I just think of the Pharisees coming to Jesus and questioning him about why he hangs out with tax collectors and sinners. Yeah. Why are you hanging out with these people? You should be hanging out with us. I love the fact that someone like Huff is sitting down with Rogan.
And he doesn't blink.
No.
Right? Like it. Okay. Yeah. Because what Rogan just said was absolutely true. Yeah. It's just colorful.
Yeah. And some of these quote morons that get, online and start barking about Huff being on Rogan when Rogan talks that way, they're also watching Yellowstone. Yeah. Game of Thrones. Let me see your Netflix history.
Yep.
And tell me what you're saturating your mind with, and then question Huff about being on Rogan's podcast.
Yeah. I'm going to back this up a couple of seconds so we can get Huff's full thoughts here.
The crazy thing about Christianity, where you have this Jewish itinerant guy who's walking around first century Roman occupied Judea. He's making some pretty audacious claims to be God himself. And then he predicts his own death and resurrection. And then his disciples they think it's over. Like, they're like, he's dead. We're done. Yeah. And then they go from 11, scared men, because Judas commit suicide. It scared men in an upper room to completely overhauling the Roman world in only a couple hundred years because of this claim that they say they saw Jesus resurrected. Like there's something different that goes on there that they're like, this is a miracle, right? Dead people don't usually rise from the dead.
So what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
That's such a good question. That's such a good question.
Oh, man.
Do you have a personal belief, or are you just interpreting the text? That's been our thing here at this church for years.
So
I don't
good.
give a rip about your personal belief. What does the text say?
What does the text say? And what the text says, I mean, this, I don't know. I haven't watched this whole podcast, so I don't know what Huff is about to say right here, but I think that is a crucial question, not only from the standpoint of basis, but also from historical accuracy. I mean, if you consider the fact that Rome, with all of its resources, could not produce a corpse to refute the claim of these disciples of Jesus. When you consider the fact that these disciples of Jesus, if they made this up, if the resurrection was a made up scheme for their benefit, why did these people die for this?
Yep.
Like when the cross was put in front of them, when the chopping block for your head was put in front of them, why did they not go, okay, we just made all this crap up, sorry, I'm not going to die for a fantasy here.
Yeah.
No, the text says he rose and hundreds of people saw him over a period of 40 days. That is another crucial piece as to how this got out of the first century. So.
Oh, yeah.
Message.
Well, I think so. As a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived.
There he goes.
He objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's hard when you're dealing with illiterate populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time, you're dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it in 2024, trying to figure it at the end of 2024, trying to figure this out. Literally the end.
Yeah.
Last couple of days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
And I get that. But we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like, we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on. For. And you do have, I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around. But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well, how
many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion?
No, saw the resurrected Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15.
So,
so good.
And
I want to say this again.
Yeah.
You said it earlier, but I appreciate Rogan's posture. Like he's questioning. I mean, he's skeptical. But he's not being a turd about it.
Yeah.
And
he's not being belligerent.
Yeah. And I think in our culture, that's just lost. We can't have, meaningful, productive conversations about debatable matters because people's attitudes are so bad. But this is a really good example of, the kind of conversations we could be having.
And Huff roots everything in Scripture.
Yeah.
You have a lot of third way winsome guys who basically say, leave the Bible at the door when you come to these. Only talk history. I'm looking at you, Andy Stanley. Like Andy Stanley is not about to get on Joe Rogan.
No, Lord no.
Joel
Rogan
Osteen
would chew him up, spit him out.
Joel Osteen, that would be something I would pay good money to watch. Is Joel
That
Osteen
needs to be
on
pay-per-view.
Joe Rogan? Yeah,
That-
yeah, that might be in a cage. Ken Copeland, Bill
man.
Johnson, etc. Because they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And they can't handle the text.
Yeah.
And they can't handle the historicity of anything. It ends up being my personal relationship with Jesus in my heart that extends no further.
Yeah.
Where Huff is saying, no, this is a real thing that happened. Here's how we know. We know because eyewitnesses wrote it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Deal with that, Rogan.
Yeah.
And I think Rogan wants to believe.
No, I told my wife this week, I was like, Rogan is going to be a believer in my lifetime. I'm convinced of it. And I think I like Huff's point too. I've said this kind of thing before many times, not nearly as eloquently as Huff does, though, that there's more to our existence than matter and motion. And I think every human being knows that.
Yep.
I don't think you can be a thinking person and conclude otherwise. And so to pull on that as, a way to reconsider the possibility of the resurrection, I think is good. But then to also couple that with the historicity of that is the history that's recorded for us in the pages of Scripture, which if you're going to deny the historical validity of the Bible, we don't know anything about antiquity.
Right.
We don't know anything.
Right.
The Bible is the most attested work of ancient history, and it's not even close.
And even Bart Ehrman, non-believing biblical scholar, which I don't know how you get there, but he will at least admit, we know what the Bible says. Yeah. It's so well attested. Yeah. All we're doing in terms of textual criticism is tinkering. It's a word here, it's a misspelling there, and whatever. We know what's in the Bible for a fact. Yeah. And so the fact that it's so well attested, you have to deal with that. You have to deal with the fact that, we have these eyewitness accounts. You have to deal with, like, if this is all there is, then who cares? Nihilism would be the logical conclusion. Yep. And Rogan took a shot earlier at atheists wearing themselves out. Mm-hmm. The angriest people I see online, in the media, or whatever, is atheists who make their atheism their religion.
It's absolutely
I don't know if you saw some climate activists just desecrated, and I got issues with Charles Darwin being buried in Westminster Abbey, right? But they desecrated Charles Darwin's grave in Westminster Abbey. They spray painted chalk with a 1.5 for the 1.5 degrees that we've warmed up or whatever. And like they just sat down and started whining about climate stuff. Like, you just made yourself insufferable is all you did. Yeah. and I keep seeing that pattern is they've worn themselves out and they just have mental breakdowns all the time.
And it seems like there's a shift in global thinking with regard to some of these just ludicrous secular ideas and philosophies and whatnot. It's almost enough to turn me post-mill in and of itself, because I ran across this comedian the other day, and I can't remember his name, and I don't think he's a believer, but he had this whole bit about, people claiming that, nothing created everything. Mm-hmm. He's like, that is the most hilarious response. And he's got, I'm not even going to remotely do it justice, but he's like, so nothing created everything, and when you die, you're going to return to nothing. So you're going to return to your maker. and it's just like, like simple logic requires us to start to think, this doesn't make sense.
Right. I'm reminded of the Keith Foskey, Doug Wilson debate on Eschatology Matters. Have you watched that at all?
No.
Where Keith Foskey says he's optimistic mill, and Doug Wilson says, no, you're just grumpy post-mill is all you are.
I mean, like when I say that it could turn me post-mill, it's like I feel like I'm starting to see more. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like there's a reasonableness that's starting to be applied by a lot of people.
Such a vibe shift going on in the culture.
It is.
Whether you talk about not just Ohio State's football team, but football in general. I've particularly noticed, I can't remember the guy's name, Scattaboo or whatever is a weird last name. Yeah. The guy for Arizona State where, they lose and then guy from the other team's like, hey, let me pray with you real quick after the game. And they just like get on their knees and pray together. Like it just keeps growing. Oh, look, Jesus said that would happen.
It really, and you think about the last podcast we did about the, the move of young men toward Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy or whatever. And we talked about the fact that, the more culture advances, the more technology advances, the more aware we're becoming that the universe is a big, scary place, and we're pretty small. And there's this longing to find something that is bigger than what scares us, and be connected to that. And I think it's created an openness to the gospel. And obviously I'm biased, but I think the bias is founded is that Christianity holds up against all other religions and that in a way that it stands alone.
It's consistent and it actually provides comfort.
It does.
Right. An assurance when properly understood. Right. Yeah. Because I remember, I don't remember which Roman Catholic debate James White did, but he quotes, I think it's Romans, blessed is the man against whom God will not impart his sin. And he asked this Catholic guy, are you that blessed man? And his response was, I hope to be. Which is no assurance at all. Right. This is why we have imputed righteousness versus imparted righteousness. When you actually have imputed righteousness, which is unique to Christianity, rightly understood, that provides so much more comfort, so much more assurance, and it takes weight off of people's shoulders. We see that here all the time.
All the time.
People who come from a Roman Catholic background, a mega church, Big Eva background, or a fundamentalist background even, is they come here and they realize they're not under the weight of the law anymore.
Yeah.
And they're not trying to clean them, as Huff put it, they're not trying to clean themselves up with a mirror, and it's freeing for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's more to the gospel than that. I mean, it's not less than that, but I think the human heart is crying for this.
Yeah.
I just taught on the wedding at Cana recently.
Yep.
And I saw something in the text that I had never noticed before, or never really paid close attention to. You mentioned the consistency of Christianity, which I would root in the consistency of God.
Yes.
Right? The story is consistent. And when Jesus turns the water into wine, he doesn't announce that he's the one who did it. Rather, he sends one of the servants to take the water, now wine, to the head waiter. And the head waiter gives the bridegroom the credit.
Yep.
And traditionally, the bridegroom would have been responsible for the wine for the guest. And so as a bridegroom, he's a failure.
Right.
His reputation should have been tarnished. But instead, because of something Jesus did, not he did, he got credit for serving the best wine last. He got credit for a merit not his own, which is at the very heart of imputed righteousness, is that Christ's righteousness is gifted to us. It's imputed to us. God treats him as if he lived our life so that he could treat us as if we lived his life. And that I think the human heart craves that kind of news.
I could nerd out on John, but I'll refrain. I will restrain myself. But if you haven't listened to that, go listen to it. The Wesley Huff, Joe Rogan interview. It is fascinating. And it's so interesting how Rogan has softened toward Christianity over the years. Yeah. Because he used to just think Christianity was stupid. He would denigrate Christians and this is all dumb and whatever. And now he's actually asking thoughtful questions. He's being softened, it looks like. I hope it results in his proper conversion.
Yeah, me too.
And I would think he's going to want to surround himself with solid biblical exegetes, which means he's going to be reformed.
Well, yeah. And I say more of this, Lord.
Yeah.
Like that. I find myself wanting to pray all the more that these kinds of conversations will happen.
Yep.
Not just on the most popular podcast,
but
in
normal
America.
Dudes.
Yeah. But among normal dudes people that we know that live across the street, that we could start having these kinds of conversations. And yeah, you know, it's right to be impressed with somebody like Huff and his scholarly yet down to earth, you know, approach to this. But I don't think we have to be intimidated if we're not scholars. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a scholar. I have an undergraduate degree, but I feel like I've become an effective pastor because I read the Bible, right?
Yep.
And I read other things too. And I try to be somewhat of a generalist, you know, in terms of knowledge. But I just think that I think more of this is something for us to learn from.
Yep.
And grow from.
This isn't exegetical 1-to-1, but James 5 says Elijah was a man just like us.
No, that's right.
There was nothing special about Elijah. There's nothing special in and of himself about Wesley Huff.
No, don't. And man, that would be something to say. Don't put him on a pedestal.
Right.
I mean, just be thankful that the Lord's using him in this way.
Because like that interview isn't perfect.
No,
because he's not perfect. There's one part where everybody knows he's talking about Jonah, but he slips up and says Noah was swallowed by a fish.
Right.
You know, whatever.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
But it's not perfect. Deal with it.
Yeah.
But go listen to it and enjoy it, and then go do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good.
Yeah.
Encouraging.
Anything else?
No, I'm good.
All right.
This needs to be on the Res podcast too. Like I wouldn't mind this, like
A little cross promotion.
cross promotion.
Okay. Well, not cross promotion. Come see me at NAMM next week. What was the booth number? 3845, I think. 3845, yeah. Go to Third Man Hardware, that's Jack White's company, and take a left. And come see me and buy stuff. Go love God. Love your neighbor. Buy Westminster Effects next week. We'll see you next time.